Now, the fourth game in this Immortal series takes us to the country of Ukraine. And this next game has been called the Ukrainian Immortal game. And the winner of this is a player by the name of Efim Krokmar, and his opponent is Polyak. It was played in 1931 in the Ukraine, and as we're going to see, it's another stunning example of when an attack works extremely well for one side. And all these Immortal games have something special about them. So let's whiz through the opening and get to where the action starts. And around here, the opening is fairly normal. We have the Raw Lopez, and now D6. This is one of the rarer moves. I would call this the Steinitz defense, named after Steinitz, of course. Being played nowadays by some players like Nigel Short, and it's an okay opening. But it does allow D4. And this is taking advantage of the pin straight away. White gets some space. So this is a good thing to follow. If your opponent plays a rather odd-looking move in the opening, like D6, you know, if you're not sure what to do, try to think of ways to take advantage of that. The knight is pinned. If you can gain space, nearly always a good thing to do. Bishop D7, breaking the pin. Knight to C3, developing. And now both sides develop. And here, black decides to liquidate the center. I mean, after this decision of knight takes d4, we have some exchanges. The bishops get exchanged on d7, and then white wins his pawn back. And this position here should really be a little bit better for white. Why? Because white has more space. It's always more pleasant to play with extra space. White has control of his fourth rank, 1, 2, 3, 4. And black only has control of his third rank, and it's just easier to play with more space. Bishop e7, and now rook d1, and the idea of this becomes clear after black castles. e5, trying to take advantage of this queen on d7. So black now is forced to go backwards. The knight hasn't really got any good squares. Knight to e8, and here white develops his last piece, bishop to f4, to a good square, trying to get some pressure against the d6 point. But here, really, it's not so clear that this game is going to be a sparkling game. It looks like a normal position. What should black do here? Well, I think the next move is a bit dubious, but it could be a little bit tricky, because if you try to move your queen, let's say somewhere like f5, to get out of the pin, this now allows knight to d5, attacking your bishop, attacking your pawn, and I think it's clear to see white's doing well here. So black tried a5 with a weird idea of rook a6 defending that point again. But now white very logically just improves his position, and one of the things you will note about most of these games, even though they're Immortal games, that they do have to follow simple principles. You can't create an Immortal game or a piece of brilliancy if you don't follow good, simple chess rules, like getting your pieces to the best squares. And after rook d3, white is just trying to get his last piece into the game, either d1 or e1. This rook has potential to swing over and attack as well, just following good principles. Rook a6, and now rook to e1. So white figures he wants his rooks on these files for when it opens up. Queen f5, so now black decides, right, well, I have to get out of this pin. I can't do anything else, because look at my congested pieces. Knight d5 does happen. Black's idea is bishop d8, trying to keep things under control, but white has great centralization with his pieces, and black is very cramped on the back rank. White decides to take on d6, opening up the rook. Knight takes d6, and here the attack starts to build. And from this moment onwards, I think it's pure energy. And it's a joy to watch how white Efim now goes about conducting the attack here. We can see how good this rook d3 move was, because after rook to g3, the threats are building. A very typical idea, this rook swing. I've talked about it before, but it's well worth noting here. Threatening checkmate. Well, this is not an easy one to stop. You don't really want to play g6, because worst case scenario, white can play bishop to h6 with a checkmate threat and a rook threat, but it just looks horrible, these dart squares. So the next move is forced, f6, and here again, when you have the initiative like this, when your pieces are looking fantastic, all of your pieces, when your opponent's pieces are looking miserable, as these guys are, you should be looking for the most energetic moves. You should be looking to bang that nail into your opponent's coffin. Pow, 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 pow. Bang it straight in there, because, you know, chess is a very logical game, and it's the build-up of small positional things that leads to tactical conclusions. And you've got to be aware of this. You've got to note when your opponent's pieces are bad and when your own pieces are good. So how do we create threats? That's what we want to do now. Create threats. Bishop h6, creating a threat. And now rook to s7, defending the threat. And here things get sparkling. Absolutely sparkling now. The next move is fantastic. Knight to b4. Moving the knight to attack the rook, so it has to be taken. But more importantly, white locates black's key defensive piece, the knight on d6, which is defending e8 mainly. And this is another good thing that you've got to play in your own games. When you are in attacking position, you've got to note your opponent's main defensive pieces, and if you can swap them off, even in an extreme way, which we see here, then it's clearly a good thing to try to do. And after pawn takes b4, we have the first brilliant move. Well, after knight b4, it's a logical continuation. Queen takes d6. Boom! Put that in your pipe and smoke it, son. And the idea of this is to try and get rook to e1 in. So if the queen is taken with either the rook or the pawn, we now have rook to e8 check. There's only one move. Rook to f8. But this releases the defense of g7. Rook takes g7 check, only one move, and now we have this guillotine-like checkmate. So after queen takes d6, black has to try and defend this square. How does he defend e8? Queen to d7, trying to gain control of that. And now we see the second fantastic move, a really astonishing move. I mean, there are other ideas. I mean, if you take on d7 here, this is also very playable. But after rook takes, black does escape. Rook to e8 check, king to f7. And the problem here is the rook on e8 is being attacked, and there is a checkmate on d1. Actually, this could really turn around. So maybe black thought he was doing okay here, but I love this next move. Astonishing. Queen d5, leaving the queen on pre, but really again locating black's key defensive piece, the rook on f7. Now that is pinned, there is a rook g7 idea. And, well, what can be played here? Well, black decides that the king has to maneuver out of this. You can't go queen takes queen, it's the same mate as before. Check, defend, mate, no defending. So what do you do? Well, you could maybe have tried king to h8 here, in this position, but now we do take on d7, because there's no f7 square for the king. Rook takes, and we have the back spanker. So king to f8 is really the only move, threatening the bishop, trying to get the queens off the board. Black would love that, but now we have a fantastic finish. Rook takes g7, another beautiful and brilliant move. This rook could be taken, but then queen takes queen, and we are easily winning with white. So there's only really one move here. Now black takes the queen on d5, and we have a phenomenal finish. If you haven't seen the finish here, I do really recommend you try to find it. What is the finish? It's white to play and force checkmate. Pause the video if you need to. Rook g8 check. Astonishing. Absolutely astonishing. Giving up another piece has to be taken to allow rook to e8. And even though white is a serious amount of pieces down, it's going to be checkmate in beautiful fashion. Hence why we have the Ukrainian Immortal game. A piece of artwork there. Something that should bring joy to every chess player's heart is watching these Immortal games. I mean, I always dreamt of playing games like this, and this has led me on to find that sheer joy that we can find as chess players on the 64 squares. And I hope you also can find that joy during the course of playing this game.